Consider the following excerpt from Ragnar Redbeard's Might is Right, Chapter 1, Section 3. Wherever, therefore, a lie has built unto itself a throne, let it be assailed without pity and without regret, for under the domination of a falsehood, no nation can permanently prosper. Let established sophisms be dethroned, rooted out, burnt and destroyed, for they are a standing menace to all true nobility of thought and action. Whatever alleged truth is proven by results to be but an empty fiction, let it be unceremoniously flung into the outer darkness, among the dead gods, dead empires, dead philosophies, and other useless lumber and wreckage. This is just one of a small handful of passages repurposed, to put it politely, by Anton LaVey into his Satanic Bible, specifically the Book of Satan, Part 2, verses 10 through 12. While it's essential to recognize the problematic origins of these works, Redbeard's being a racist social Darwinist screed, and LaVey's a patchwork of appropriated and sensationalist rhetoric, the sentiment they express deserves scrutiny. Whenever a lie has built unto itself a throne, let it be assailed without pity or regret. Is this not the essence of Satan? Modern Christianity portrays Satan as a rebellious angel who became the king of demons and the embodiment of all evil in the world. Centuries of translations, retranslations, and politically motivated edits aside, this image raises two issues. Christians, in their varied denominations, do not agree on the definition of evil, and they struggle to reconcile a benevolent, omnipotent God with evil's existence. Atheistic LaVeyan Satanists, on the other hand, reduce Satan to a mere symbol of earthly indulgence and rejection of moral authority, which is fine if you accept the idea that there is no God but the one modern Americhristians created in their own image. Both interpretations, however, fail to account for the more nuanced role of Satan in the Bible. And if you're going to invoke the name of Satan as part of your beliefs, you have to do your homework. The Hebrew word Satan means adversary, opposite, accuser, or prosecutor. It appears many times in the Bible, but mostly in reference to human figures, such as adversaries in battle, or in legal disputes, or simply someone who purposely impedes or diverts one's path. The character of Satan, or Ha-Satan, the adversary, only in fact appears 3 times, and never to commit an act of evil or to endorse earthly, fleshly indulgences. In the book of Job, he is a tester of faith under God's command, allowed to strip Job of his wealth, health, and family in order to prove the depth of his faith. In Zechariah, he stands as an accuser, not in opposition to God, but beside him in his role as prosecutor. Lastly, in the book of Matthew, he challenges Christ's resolve during his temptation in the wilderness. Religious and spiritual truth are subjective, influenced by one's awareness and perspective. Yet, both the modern Americhristian illiterati and the self-important gatekeeping LaVeyan Satanists proclaim their truths to be objective fact, independent of perspective or consciousness. They can't both be right, and neither will consider the possibility of being wrong, or worse yet, subjective. Another passage of Redbeard's, partially digested and regurgitated by LaVey, is, "Religions and constitutions and all arbitrary principles, every mortal theorem, must be deliberately put to the question." This attitude is shared by both Americhristians and LaVeyan Satanists, provided that it only applies to religions other than their own. LaVey once wrote that Satanism demands study, not worship. But this critical engagement with belief systems is something that the LaVeyan school has largely neglected. While identifying as a Satanist for personal or philosophical reasons is perfectly valid, it's crucial to acknowledge that this label can carry varied meanings. If you adopt Satanism purely for rebellion or hedonistic purposes, that's your prerogative. But it's also important to recognize that the term can represent something deeper, something with more philosophical weight. Gatekeeping against others who interpret Satanism differently not only limits its potential, but ignores the broader spectrum of thought it can encompass, as well as demonstrates insecurity of position. Peter J. Carroll wrote in Liber Null and Psychonaut, "If the earth were reduced to the size of a grain of sand, then the universe would still be unimaginably vast on the same scale. It is most unlikely that whatever creates on this scale takes a personal interest in what we had for breakfast." In the Satanic Bible, in the Book of Lucifer's chapter titled Wanted, God Dead or Alive, LaVey writes, "It is a popular misconception that the Satanist does not believe in God. The concept of God, as interpreted by man, has been so varied throughout the ages that the Satanist simply accepts the definition which suits him best. To the Satanist, God, by whatever name he is called, or by no name at all, is seen as the balancing factor in nature, and not as being concerned with suffering. This powerful force which permeates and balances the universe is far too impersonal to care about the happiness or misery of flesh and blood creatures on this ball of dirt upon which we live." While the man himself has stated plainly in interviews that Satanism is atheistic, his written description of the creative force is deism in a nutshell. Deism refers to an intellectual movement born in the 17th century that accepts the existence of a universal creator, but rejects the idea that said creator interferes in the affairs of humans. The passage about accepting the definition of God that suits one best alludes to the concept of co-creation, a concept requiring a more complex explanation. While the idea of a being capable of creating an entire infinite and complex universe having any vested interest in how human beings dress, eat, couple, parent, or govern their nations may be ludicrous, the idea of a creator that doesn't care about us is scary for many people. Weird fiction author H.P. Lovecraft played on this fear throughout his works. This is why God, as the zealous majority have grown to understand the concept over the ages, grew to possess more and more human characteristics. The earliest gods possessed characteristics of animals in addition to those of humans to represent a connection between us and the hostile environment at whose mercy we lived before we created civilizations. Afterwards, as human civilizations grew further and further away from nature, our gods became more and more human, to such a degree that even our kings became gods. Now, just as then, we assign familiar characteristics to the eternal unknowable in order to make it more relatable. Just as it created us from the stars, so have we created our god archetypes from it, and they became our reality, allowing us to tap into the eternal unknowable for our own purposes. We and it co-create each other. To quote the late Reverend John Alley, "It is that simple and that difficult to understand." Necessity is the mother of invention, as the old cliché goes, and humanity's gods have always been born out of some need. What need, therefore, does Satan fill? If Satan is merely the scapegoat for evil, his role becomes a unifying enemy. But humanity is far from united. Those who live in fear of devils have a tendency to see him in each other. And the question is left open as to why a loving God would create him. I once heard it said on TV by a clergyman/exorcist that God allowed for the creation of evil and perpetration of sin because he loves to forgive humans. This makes his God sound rather like an abuser, inflicting harm so he can heal it and be thanked for doing so. If Satan merely represents indulgence, he becomes unnecessary. Humans do not need divine permission to enjoy their existence, especially if they profess disbelief in the divine. Those who view Satan in this way, whether in rebellion against religious moralism or as a symbol of personal freedom, entitled as they are to their views, may miss the deeper philosophical point. Satan in the Bible does not represent indulgence, but challenge. And challenge is crucial. Satan tested Job's faith because, while God recognized Job's devotion, Satan believed it might have stemmed only from his good fortune, and that if Job were to lose everything, he would lose his faith as well. In Zechariah chapter 3 verses 1 through 7, Satan called high priest Joshua's worthiness into question by his unclean state. Satan's temptation of Jesus in Matthew chapter 4 verses 1 through 11 ensured his fitness for divine purpose. After all, we can't let just anybody die for humanity's sins. Satan's role in the Bible: testing faith, accusing, and challenging worthiness, recollects the ancient tribal rites of passage, where individuals were tested to prove their strength or character. Satan's actions align with this principle. The adversary's role is not to perpetuate evil, but to test and provoke individuals to examine and prove their worth. How do we translate this into a modern necessity? The invocation of the Satanic Temple contains the words, "That which will not bend must break." We humans have such an unfortunate tendency to stand in our own way, and that of others, by clinging to beliefs and convictions that fail or cease to serve us. And if we're not willing to examine our beliefs, life inevitably tests them for us, until we can either prove that our ways are worth clinging to, or let go and adapt. Refusal to do either leaves us wallowing in a hell to which we, not any cosmic villain, have condemned ourselves. This is the role of Ha-Satan in its truest form, the natural prosecutor of conviction. Thomas Paine in The Age of Reason writes, "Belief in a cruel God makes a cruel man." What then does it mean to be a Satanist? If Christianity is defined as walking in Christ's footsteps, what would it mean to walk in Satan's? If Satan is merely evil incarnate and you wish to emulate him, you need help. If Satan is indulgence, then the lifestyle grows stale, as it did for the hell-rakes of Medmenham Abbey. But if Satan is the adversary, the tester of truth, the challenger of dogma, then a satanic path could be one of profound personal rigor. Lucian Greaves and the Satanic Temple embody the adversarial spirit in action. Sitting in high positions of authority and influence here in the USA, the U being used increasingly loosely, are people who wear the cross like a lucky rabbit's foot while knowing little to nothing about Christian philosophy or biblical teachings. Instead, they wield their shallow, superstitious faith as a cudgel, using it to justify bigotry, intolerance, and authoritarianism. They hold up the American flag as a shield and emblem of their righteousness while simultaneously pissing on the values that it and our Constitution represent. Were it only their own lives they sought to submit, rather than those of the masses, they could be left to their own devices. But these liars who have built thrones unto themselves cry out to be assailed. The Satanic Temple have repeatedly answered their hypocrisy using the legal and rhetorical tools of their opponents. Even without courtroom wins, their symbolism strikes where it matters. Meanwhile, the Church of Satan, in contrast, has largely become inert, flaunting a banner of elitism while doing little with it. That said, the Satanic Temple's spiritual depth remains in question. Their conception of Satan as a metaphor rather than a spiritual force makes them, ultimately, a socio-political movement. Like LaVeyans, they deny Satan any independent identity. In the end, while there may be a place for Satan the adversary in the mythic and philosophical pantheon, he is a difficult figure around which to build a coherent, sustaining religion. Still, as a symbol of challenge, of the necessary test, of resistance to dogma, of the uncomfortable truths that force us to grow, Satan holds undeniable value. If one were to build a spiritual path around this archetype, it would not be a path of indulgence or rebellion for its own sake, but one of continual confrontation with assumptions, convictions, and imposed truths, especially our own. Such a path would demand that its adherents embrace discomfort as a crucible for growth and regard every trial as a mirror reflecting who they are and what they stand for. Its only true commandment might be this: never hold a conviction you are unwilling to see tested. In that sense, the Satanist becomes not an enemy of faith, but its most honest auditor. This is no easy road. It asks more than a mockery of the pious or rejection of moral restraint. It asks rigor, responsibility, and a willingness to suffer the friction of truth. And while that may be a lonely or even quixotic endeavor, it is perhaps the most noble one that Satan, the accuser, the tester, could ever aspire. I leave the question of what a sustainable spiritual practice under adversarial Satanism might look like open to contemplation. Paths to gnosis through self-imposed hardship have existed for ages, but none specifically dedicated to Satan. History has yet to truly show a sustainable spiritual practice under any satanic philosophy. Homicidal devil worshippers inevitably get caught. Sir Francis Dashwood's friars eventually grew old, tired, and bored with orgies and black masses. The Satanic Temple, it may be argued, seems dependent on injustices to fight. So hypothetically, extremely so, if utopia were to be achieved and social justice reigned supreme, what would keep the organization going? Peter Gilmore of the LaVey camp once remarked in an interview on Canadian television that Satanism is a tool, not a cause. But a tool is only useful when there's work to do. So once you've broken your chains, what do you build?